Hi, everybody. I'm State Senator Jason Lewis. Thank you very much for attending our virtual town hall this evening. As you can see, I'm actually wearing red tonight. And as some of you may know, that's in recognition of the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women campaign. Cardiovascular disease is actually the #1 killer of women in the United States every year, causing 1 in 3 deaths. And this campaign is to raise awareness of this important issue. I want to thank Paul Albright and Zach Crowley from my team for helping to organize and staff our town hall this evening. And I also want to express my gratitude to Paul Albright, who organized and conducted our constituent survey, which we ran starting in December through January. And I'm really excited to share with you the results of the constituent survey this evening and talk about our next steps. Paul, let's get right into it. So what we're going to do is run through brief presentation, probably take maybe 10 to 15 minutes of the results of our constituent survey. And after that, we should have plenty of time for Q&A. And I really welcome any questions that you'd like to ask me or any feedback that you'd like to provide us. And you should do so by typing your questions or feedback right into the Facebook comments. And then we will display those on the screen so everybody can see your question. And I'll do my best to answer, as many of the questions as we can this evening. All right. So first of all, hopefully many of you joining us tonight did take a few minutes to respond to our constituent survey, and we are very grateful, that you did so. In terms of what we're trying to accomplish with this constituent survey, first and foremost, we're looking to gather input and feedback, from our constituents, and that's to help us set our priorities and our policy agenda for the new legislative session, which started at the beginning of January. We also, by doing the survey, we were trying to encourage civic engagement and encourage participation in the political process. We did make a particular effort in conducting the survey to try to hear from a diverse set of voices and perspectives across our communities, including voices that are often underrepresented, such as young people. And I should also say right at the outset that we certainly recognize the limitations of a survey like this. We certainly know that this is not a scientific survey, and it's not something that we intended it to be. It was more just to provide a tool for constituents to be able to share their thoughts and feedback with us on their priority issues. Again, as we enter into this new legislative session. So the next slide is just an overview of sort of what we did to try to make sure that as many residents of our district as possible, had a chance to see the survey, had a chance to respond. It was certainly publicized through our newsletter list. We put it out on various social media platforms. We did also use various local media outlets. We sent the survey to more than 100, actually, I think it was close to 150 community organizations across the 6 communities that I have the privilege of representing. And really appreciate that a number of those organizations did also post the survey link on their social media and share it with their members to encourage them to respond. And I'm really proud of the extra effort we undertook to partner with our local high schools. And I'm so appreciative to the principals and teachers, particularly social studies teachers at a number of our high schools who partnered with us to really engage a lot of young people in this process. In fact, I even went to Stoneham High School and we did an in-person roundtable discussion and forum with probably we had more than 50 students talking again about the legislative process, talking to them about how we pass legislation, getting their feedback, and then encouraging them to respond to our survey. So as a result of this, we were thrilled with the response. More than 1,000 of our constituents did fill out the survey. And that was a lot higher than in previous years when we've conducted the survey before. So again, that was really terrific. And again, appreciate all of Paul Albright's efforts to help us really get as many responses as possible. We were pleased to have participation from all parts of our district. For those who don't know, I represent Malden, Melrose, Reading, Stoneham, Wakefield, and parts of Winchester, and we had folks from all of those communities respond. And we also had participation from across all age groups and all demographics, as I mentioned, with particularly strong participation from young people. All right, so what you've been waiting for, let's get to what were the highest priority issues identified by the survey. Here we're looking at that across all of the respondents. So across all 1,000 plus respondents, the top issues, and this is based upon a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 would be really, really important and 1 would be not important. We actually had 4 different issues that basically all tied for first place with a score of 8.1. And as you can see on the slide, these 4 issues were protecting and conserving our environment, including access to open space, strengthening our gun safety laws, making healthcare more affordable, and improving access to and treatment for mental health and substance use disorder. So those across all of the different age groups and demographics who responded were the issues that scored the highest. If you look at the next slide, however, what you'll see is that really there is a lot of issues that our communities and you all care deeply about. And really all of the issues listed on this slide, which you can see include education, government accountability, safeguarding reproductive rights, improving public transit, combating climate change, racial justice issues, worker rights, so many issues, all essentially scored pretty high in the survey. I mean, these are all issues that got at least a 7 out of 10. So, that certainly says to me that there are a lot of issues, across, a range of different topic areas that are important to the constituents that I represent, and are all issues, that we need to take seriously, that we need to do everything we can to try to address and to make progress on through our work in the legislature and in state government. So the next 2 slides basically break down the top issues by age group. And it is really interesting to see how different, maybe it's not surprising, but really does put a spotlight on how the priority issues do differ quite a bit depending on what age group you're in. So for our youngest respondents to the survey, basically high school students, the top 3 issues in this group were supporting immigrant rights, making public higher education more affordable, reducing student debt. Obviously not a surprise that high school students would be concerned about that. And strengthening gun safety laws and reducing gun violence. Just sadly, the number of tragic shootings, including school shootings that we've had, across this country, you can just see the toll that takes on our young people. And the fact that that is one of their top 3 concerns, that we're doing everything possible to keep them safe and to make sure that we continue to strengthen and enforce our gun safety laws. If we move next to the next age group, which is those who are age 18 to 34, so kind of young adults, what you see here is also that they care a lot about the cost of public higher education. And again, that's not surprising given that many of these are fairly recent college graduates. They also care a lot about the cost of healthcare and housing. Again, not surprising. These are folks who are paying, often having to pay very high rents, maybe considering home ownership. And as we all know, these are very big challenges in our communities and in the greater Boston region. If we move next to the next two age groups, sort of our 35 to 64-year-olds, and then folks who are over age 65. The 35 to 64 demographic, a top three issue for them is our public schools, what we're doing to provide adequate funding for our public schools and to help our schools and our students recover from the pandemic. And again, I think probably not a big surprise that this demographic, which is obviously when many people have children, school-age children, that's a high priority issue for them. The other two key top issues that this age group cited are our infrastructure and also protecting and conserving our environment, open space. The folks that are older, our seniors, for them, the top three issues were healthcare costs, also in infrastructure, and state government, how state government functions, how responsive we are, how accountable we are. So again, very interesting, I thought, to see this. Obviously, some overlap in certain issues between different age groups, but also some clear differences that I think is very helpful feedback for me and our team, as we go forward in this in this legislative session. So moving on to the next slide, sort of what happens next and where do we go from here? I know some of you are very familiar with the legislative process in Massachusetts and how a bill becomes law. And many of you are veterans at advocating for issues you care deeply about. But for those maybe who are less familiar, we have legislative sessions in Massachusetts that last 2 years. We just started a new session in beginning of January. This was after the elections we held last November. So this session will last for 2023 and 2024. As of January 20th, state lawmakers, both state senators and state representatives, faced a deadline to file legislation for the new session. And overall, I think that, I don't know the exact number, but there were more than 5,000 bills that were filed either by representatives or senators. I personally filed a little over 100 different bills that cover a range of different issue areas, and we'll be talking about some of those tonight. And we'll also be updating our website in the coming weeks, so you'll be able to look those up if you're interested. And then in addition to bills that I filed myself, that I'm the lead sponsor of, and that my colleagues, the bills they file, we can also co-sponsor the bills that our colleagues have filed. And so I'm in the process right now of adding my name as a co-sponsor to many other bills as well. And I've been getting feedback from lots of you, who've been emailing and calling us about legislation that you are supportive of and that you would like me to co-sponsor. And in a few cases, bills you would like me not to co-sponsor. And that feedback is very helpful and welcome. And again, we're in the process now of going through all those bills and making those co-sponsorship decisions. What happens then is every single bill will get assigned to a committee. So, the legislature has, as you might imagine, is an education committee, a transportation committee, it has a judiciary committee, labor committee, economic development committee, and so forth. So each bill gets assigned, and every bill will be reviewed by the committee membership and staff. And also every bill will have a public hearing. And I'm really excited that the public hearings in this legislative session will all be hybrid. So the chairs of the committee and some members of the committee will be at the State House, which is typically where we hold public hearings. And members of the public who wanted to express their support or their opposition to a particular bill will be able to either do so in person. You can come to the State House and testify in person, which is the way it used to work before the pandemic, or you'll be able to do so remotely. And as you know, during the pandemic, we moved everything online virtually, but now we're going to have the best of both worlds. So we'll have both an in-person opportunity for the public and for advocates, as well as a remote option as well. And I think that's just going to really, I think, make the legislative process more accessible to more people, particularly those who have transportation challenges, mobility issues, childcare or elder care needs, can't get off work, and all these other reasons that made it difficult to come to the State House before. So all those bills are going to public hearings. If you're interested, you can testify. You can also always send an email, you can always send it to my office, and then we'll submit it on your behalf, to the members of the committee, if you'd like to do so. Then for any single bill ultimately to become law in Massachusetts, it has to get a favorable report from the committee. Then it has to eventually make its way to the floor of both the House and the Senate, and it would have to be debated and passed, by both the branches. If the branches pass different versions of the bill, they have to reconcile those differences in what's called a conference committee. And then if they're able to successfully do that, the bill will go to Governor Healy's desk, and then hopefully the governor either signs the bill, or even if the governor did not sign it and vetoed it, the legislature still has the ability to override that veto for it to become law. So that's basically the process. Again, we're at the beginning now, and that's why this constituent survey was and all of your helpful feedback is really appreciated, because again, helps us to think about again what bills we were going to file, what bills we will co-sponsor, and how we're going to focus our efforts in this legislative session ahead of us. So the last slide is basically just sort of some tips, if you will, about how to be an effective advocate for issues that you care about. Again, I know many of you understand this really well and already have been working in the past on advocating and have had a lot of success on issues you've worked on at the local level or state level. And I know some of you have even worked on issues at the federal level. But basically, my advice is, first of all, make sure you understand the issue. Try to, do your homework, understand the issue, understand, what's been done already in Massachusetts, understand, what the legislation is that's being considered, and, what the legislative process is, what I just went over a few moments ago. Very often there's an organization or multiple organizations, that is already involved in advocating and for that particular issue and educating members of the public and members of the legislature. So by all means, team up with that organization. And some of them you just get on their email list, or you can become a member, or just regularly visit their website. And so that they will really help you to understand, what is happening with a particular bill or issue and how to be most effective in your advocacy. Most important thing is, communicate with policymakers. Don't, a lot of people feel like, they can't go and talk to their mayor or the town councilor or their state senator or their congressperson. I could never do that. And you should. You have every right to do that. Any elected official, whether we're in town or city government, state government or federal, we are elected by and we work on behalf of you. So you should always feel like you have every right to reach out to us. You can always send email. That's an easy way to communicate with us. You can call us. You can engage with us on social media. We're obviously on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Maybe we should also be on other platforms as well. Let us know if you think we should. I always have office hours. I have in-person office hours in each of the 6 communities I represent. I also do virtual office hours on Zoom once a month. And so we always welcome anyone to stop in office hours. You don't need an appointment. You can just come by, and I make every effort to be there personally myself. So I'll often have a staff person with me, but I'll almost always be there myself as well. So really welcome. That's a great chance to come and just say hello, talk about an issue you have, talk about your advocacy on something at the local level or the state level. And then, of course, encourage you to participate in local meetings and events in your own community, at the State House. Some of those are in person now. Some of those are virtual. That's a great way to also get involved and again, be an effective advocate. And of course, I don't need to tell you this, but, vote for leaders, whether again, that's in town or city government, state government, federal government, who share your policy views. That is obviously an important way to advocate on the issues you care about. All right, so I think that's it for the presentation part of the town hall, and we're going to now open it up for any questions you want to ask me. I'll certainly do my best to answer them, or if you just want to share some further feedback, please do that. By the way, I should also mention that in the course of responding to the survey, many of you also gave open-ended responses, to the survey, and in the end, there was about 20 pages worth of feedback that you provided, and I made sure actually this past weekend to kind of read through all of that, and so did my staff. So I want to make sure you know that everything you provided to us in the survey, we all read that, including me, and really, again, appreciate everything that you shared with us throughout that process. All right, so Paul, do we have some questions coming in for us? All right, so the first question, and Paul's going to kind of put the questions, as you can see, on the screen, so just everybody can see it as well, and I'm seeing the questions at the same time you are. So question here is about the Indigenous legislative agenda and the my support for that and the Flag and Seal Commission. So absolutely, I'm very supportive of the efforts that we've been underway to recognize our Indigenous communities, in Massachusetts. I was very proud to be the lead Senate sponsor of the legislation that actually created this special commission to come up with a new state seal for Massachusetts, and that will also mean a new state flag as well. And that commission is underway. They've been doing their work for, I think, maybe a year to 2 years now. It is taking a little bit longer than we had hoped, but they're moving along very carefully and methodically. We were successful in getting that commission some funding, because they need some help with some consulting and some design assistance. So they are going to put that to use. And I'm very much looking forward to getting the recommendations for a new state seal and flag, and probably also a new motto for Massachusetts as well. And we expect that from the commission likely by the end of this year. In addition, I would say the other piece of legislation relating to our Indigenous communities that I'm really supportive of and championing have been championing for a number of years is to stop using Native American mascots in our high schools. Number of the communities I represent, have done so already, but there still are some towns across Massachusetts that still unfortunately use racist Native American mascots, and I would love to see those communities, phase them out on their own. But I do think we should, we should also pass state legislation to do so at the state level, and as has been done in Maine already, and I think maybe one or two other states. So we're going to continue hopefully to make progress on that agenda this session. All right. We've got a question here from Fritzy Nace. Thanks, Fritzy, for joining us. The hybrid sessions be for the Senate only or also the House? So the great news is what I was describing are the public hearings for that we hold, that committees hold, like the Education Committee will have its hearings, the Transportation Committee, Judiciary Committee, and so on. Those committees are almost all joint committees. So the way we structure things in Massachusetts legislature is the House and Senate have joint committees. So there's a House chair of the committee, and then there's a Senate chair of the committee, and then there's members that are from both the House and Senate. So those are the hearings that I was referring to that are going to be hybrid. So in other words, so both the House and Senate are basically going to be doing hybrid hearings. And so for any of the bills, environmental bills or others that you care about, you'll be able to, again, come to the State House in person and testify, as was true before the pandemic, or you'll be able to do so remotely. I don't know if we'll be using Zoom or be using Microsoft Teams, but whatever the platform is, you'll be able to do it that way. And then as a chair of a committee, last session I chaired the education committee. It'll be up to the chairs to sort of manage that process. So, we would basically probably go back and forth between people who are testifying in person and those who are doing so remotely, some sort of process like that. All right, let's see. Our next question is about a bill that addresses rodenticides and the impact on I know this is, it's a big impact on hawks and the birds of prey and other wildlife. So thanks, Ruth, for that question. I'm very supportive of this legislation. I think it's just awful, the impact that some of these rodenticides are having, as they get concentrated in the food chain in birds of prey. We do absolutely need to take action on this issue. Last session, this bill almost made it across the finish line, but didn't quite get all the way there. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic, that this session, this bill will start from a place already where we've got good momentum and a lot of support for the bill. And so I'm very hopeful. And it's certainly a bill I'll be co-sponsoring. And Senator Feeney filed the bill in the Senate. I've talked to him about it already. And Representative Hawkins, I know, has been a champion of this bill in the House and also know him very well. And so I'll certainly do what I can to see that this bill hopefully becomes law. All right, let's see. The next question has to do any developments on tenant rights in terms of disability government assistance discrimination that furthers segregation. So I think you're getting at a variety of different issues here in this question. Thank you for that. I think everybody sort of realizes how challenging the housing situation is in our communities. It's particularly acute in the greater Boston area, but I'm also hearing even in other parts of Massachusetts how challenging it is in terms of rising rents and cost of in terms of home ownership. And now we also have increased rising interest rates, which makes it more expensive. So this is a really big challenge for sure. There's some things that the legislature and former Governor Baker already did do in terms of updating some of our zoning rules, putting a lot more funding behind housing development and public housing and rental assistance and other programs to prevent homelessness and help families who are at risk of homelessness. So some of that was using federal COVID relief money, which was really helpful. Unfortunately, obviously, that money's largely been used up. So this is something we really have to continue to focus on through the state budget process and also through additional legislation. So I do expect there'll be a lot of bills that will be coming before us related to including things around tenant rights, tenant right of first refusal, tenant right to legal counsel in eviction proceedings, and a variety of other bills. And I'm certainly going to be co-sponsoring many of those bills, as I did last session. And I'm hopeful that, again, with new Governor Maura Healey's leadership, because she, during her campaign, access to quality, affordable housing was a major campaign theme for her. And she's continued to make that a priority as, she's setting up her administration, including the fact that she's planning to restructure her cabinet in order to have a dedicated Secretary of Housing. And I think that's a great move. And I think we'll put much more of a focus and kind of streamline a lot of our programs across our government around housing. All right, let's see what we have next. All right, we have a question from Lynn Brodsky. Thanks, Lynn, about efforts at the legislative level to increase the ranks of mental health providers in the Commonwealth. who accept mass health comorbidity. Yes. Also another critical issue. So thanks for raising it. And also, if you recall back to the survey results, that we just went through, one of the top issues identified in the survey was access to quality, affordable behavioral health care, right, which includes mental health and substance use treatment. So this is a very important issue. It was in many ways exacerbated by the pandemic, particularly among young people. We really are unfortunately and tragically seeing, quite a mental health crisis among our teens and young adults. Good news is that last year, after many years of work, the legislature passed a very significant mental health bill. Governor Baker signed it, and that bill is starting to be implemented now. And it is going to, I think, do a lot to increase the workforce, the mental health workforce. For example, it's going to increase reimbursement rates for providers. It's going to actually enforce real parity between mental health and physical health, which has been the law, but has not really been enforced. It's also going to provide hundreds of millions of dollars for loan forgiveness programs and also for tuition assistance for folks that are going into the mental health field. So that should also provide to help grow the workforce. Community behavioral health centers are a new initiative, and we've got several of those that are going to be serving our region. That's kind of like urgent care for mental health. Elliott is operating one of those, and Cambridge Health Alliance is also. So I'm excited about those new services for our communities. We've got provisions in that bill to address emergency room boarding. So there's a lot in there, and there's also a lot of funding that the legislature has been providing also for mental health care. But again, it's going to take some time, for this to be fully implemented and to see the impacts, on our communities. All right. Thank you. By the way, we're getting so many questions tonight and really great issues that you're all raising. All right. So thanks, Finn, for bringing up another easy issue facing the legislature and Governor Healy, which is the state of the MBTA. And Finn has also mentions that the Fair Share Amendment, also known as the Millionaire's Tax, passed last year, and that was thanks to the voters of Massachusetts. And so, that does provide additional funding for education and transportation. So let's see. In terms of the MBTA, this is, as you point out in your question, this is an issue that is so fundamental to the well-being of the entire greater Boston region. People can't get to and from work or to school or medical appointments or the other places they need to go, many people, if there isn't reliable, safe, convenient, and affordable public transportation. And, we've just had, one problem after another with the MBTA. And I'm very hopeful that the new administration, Governor Healy, as you know, is currently conducting a search for a new general manager for the MBTA. I know she's looking for somebody who has deep expertise in the operations and management of a large public transit system. That's not typically what we've had in many of our previous general managers. I think that's the right fit. I think we're going to need to have a lot of other changes in terms of the MBTA leadership. I think we're going to need a number of reforms as to how the MBTA operates, some of which the governor may be able to do on her own, and some of which she may need legislative help to do so. And I stand ready to do, whatever we need to do to try to really put the MBTA on the right path forward. Certainly, some of that, will be funding. The MBTA right now is also trying to hire a lot more people, and they're just having a tough time even finding the workforce that they need which is not a unique problem to them. But we will also, I think, be able to use at least some of the fair share money for the MBTA. Again, I think right now we're looking to let Governor Healy and her new Secretary of Transportation and her new general manager, when that person is named, kind of take stock of the situation, what the other needs that they have in terms of additional personnel changes that need to be made, as well as other structural and operating reforms, and as well as the funding, both for operating purposes and also for capital needs that they have going forward. All right. We have a question from Shaylin here. Thank you for this one about the effort by State House employees to form a union. And I am supportive of the right of all workers, to be able to organize and have their voices heard, and be able to work together for better wages and benefits and working conditions. And that is true as well for the employees at the State House as it is for other public sector and private sector workers. I actually met last year with, along with some of my staff, met with the folks who organized the union for legislative employees in Colorado. And they've been pretty successful. They formed that about a year ago, and they've been successful in improving wages and working conditions for their legislative staff. And so thought that was really a good model that they've pursued that, it seemed to me could be a model that could work, here for the Massachusetts legislature. So I know that staff members are considering that, and whether that's, the best model for them moving forward. So we'll see where that leads. I am also proud to be sponsoring legislation, working with SEIU 32BJ and the Machinists Union to basically create a opportunity for rideshare drivers to form a union and to collectively bargain over things like their compensation, their benefits, and working conditions. And that would be, huge, because that could create a model for how workers in the gig economy, could organize and be able to collectively bargain for better compensation and benefits. So I'm really hopeful that we can make some real progress on that area as well. All right. The next question we have is whether the survey results indicated a need for more daycare slots in our communities, daycare needs in our area. So, so certainly one of the questions we did ask in the survey was about improving access to affordable early education and childcare, and that definitely was it wasn't one of the most highest priority issues, but it was certainly one of the an issue that many people said is a priority for them as well. It's actually been an area that I've been spending a lot of time on over the last few years, because it's something I care a lot about, but also because I've been the chair of the Education Committee for 2 sessions now. The Education Committee actually has jurisdiction not just for K through 12 schools, but also for early education and childcare. So I was very proud last session to help chair a special legislative commission that looked very thoroughly at all the issues we have in early education and childcare in Massachusetts, including how unaffordable it is for so many families, how so many providers are struggling to survive, and also just how difficult it is to recruit and retain early educators because they're so poorly compensated. So that commission produced a report, which is a real blueprint for how we need to improve. And maybe Paul or Zach, if you're able to even post a link to that report in the Facebook comments, that would be terrific, because folks can look at this on their own. But we are now starting to implement those recommendations. We started to do so in the state budget last year by providing hundreds of millions of dollars in increased funding for early education providers and for subsidies for working families. And I was very, very proud to lead the passage of legislation in the Senate, which we debated and passed last July, again, addressing how we increase access to more affordable early education for families. And unfortunately, that bill did not get taken up in the House of Representatives before the session ended. But I have refiled that bill in the Senate, and it's been refiled in the House as well. And we've got a wonderful coalition called the Common Start Coalition working on it. Governor Healy has said this is a priority issue for her as well. And the business community has gotten involved also because, if working parents don't have access to reliable childcare and early ed, that's going to affect their ability to work and be productive. And this has disproportionately been impacting women. So they are also involved in helping to champion what we need to do to really transform our early education and childcare system in the state. And I think Massachusetts can really be a leader nationally in this area. We've got people like Senator Elizabeth Warren, Congresswoman Catherine Clark, who are national leaders and champions on the issue. And I'd love to see Massachusetts, blaze a trail here for other states and the country to follow. All right. The next question is relative to the minimum wage. So just to kind of remind everybody, the minimum wage in Massachusetts is $15 an hour. That is as of January 1st of this year. Back in 2018, I was serving as the Senate chair of the Labor Committee. And Paul Broder, who is now the mayor of Melrose, doing a great job as mayor, was a state representative, and he was the House chair of the Labor Committee. And Paul and I worked with the business community and labor unions and advocates and our colleagues in the legislature. And we helped negotiate the passage of what was known as the Grand Bargain. And that law created a paid family and medical leave program in Massachusetts. So that's great. That's available to all workers to be able to take paid time off work if you have birth of a child or adopt a child, or you have a serious illness, in your family or yourself. Also included in that new law was an increase in the minimum wage from $10 an hour all the way to $15 an hour. And that got phased in over 5 years. So we finally did get there at the beginning of this year. And, I think that $15 an hour, is one of the higher minimum wages in the country. It's not the highest, but it's one of the higher. But, unfortunately, it's still, not even close to a living wage in this area. And, it's estimated for a single person living in the greater Boston area, living wage, according to MIT, is somewhere around $22 an hour. And of course, if you're trying to support a family, you need a lot more than that. So also, again, we could not have anticipated, when we did agree on a $15 minimum wage back in 2018, that we would be facing the kind of inflation that we've seen in recent years. And that has really eaten away at the purchasing power of the minimum wage. So I personally believe we need to start a conversation now about where we go from here. And as a result of that, I did file a new bill this session. I'm working with the Raise Up Coalition, who's been very active on this issue in the past. And also some wonderful colleagues in the House of Representatives have filed the same bill in the House. And basically that bill would propose to increase the minimum wage to $20 an hour. It would propose to do so over a 4-year period. And it would also increase the tipped minimum wage as well to go along with that. So I'm looking forward to that conversation getting underway. I do think the business community, particularly small businesses, need to very much be at the table and part of this conversation, because we need to do this in a careful and thoughtful way. A lot of our small businesses in particular are still, coming out of the pandemic and are struggling with costs and with their the workforce shortage that we have across the economy. So we do need to do this in a way that has everybody at the table, and we talk about how to make sure this work is going to work for our workforce and also for our employers as well. But it's a very important conversation that I think we need to get underway. All right. Thank you, Presetti, for bringing up issues, a few other environmental issues, our pollinator bill that we filed, and also glyphosate. So yes, we do have a bill that would prohibit the use of glyphosate, which is more commonly known as Roundup, on public lands. And there's some other bills as well around that issue that would have even a broader prohibition. And we definitely need to do more, obviously, to protect habitat for our pollinators and native species and other wildlife as well. So I think the best way to support, these bills is some of the ways that I mentioned earlier in terms of, look for the environmental groups that are going to be advocating for these bills. We'll be seeing in the coming weeks from the Sierra Club, Mass 350, Environmental League of Mass, Clean Water Action, the different wonderful environmental organizations will all be publishing, their legislative agendas and priorities, once they see all the bills that have been filed. So you can take a look at that. Hopefully some of those organizations will include, the glyphosate and pollinator bills, among their list. And then by working with them, that's the best way, I think, to know, where we are in the legislative process and when to weigh in and how best to support these bills. But thank you so much for bringing them up and for your support. All right. Let's see what's next. Okay, so we have a question about the Northeast MetroTech project. All right, thank you, David, for bringing this up. So what David is referring to here, for those who may not be aware, the way that students in our communities can access technical vocational education, because that type of education is not offered in any of our high schools directly. So we have a regional school. This is true in some other parts of the state as well, of course, and that's the Northeast School, which is located in Wakefield. And Northeast serves 12 different communities for students who, after middle school, they want to be able to attend get a vocational technical education. And it's a wonderful school. They do a phenomenal job providing access to a range of different career options for students. Their school building desperately has needed to be replaced. It's very outdated, lots of problems, with that building. And, they've been embarking on a project to rebuild, to have a brand new, world-class technical vocational high school that would serve all of our communities. It would be a wonderful asset for our students and families, and really for all of our communities in this region. I know that there's concern from a number of people. I've certainly met with many people over the last couple months who've come to my office hours or called me, concerned about the site that was selected, to build this new high school. It's on property owned by Northeast, but it's a different site from where the high school sits currently. And I certainly, share concerns that folks have about, minimizing any environmental impacts of when we build new developments, or whether it's schools or any other developments. As well as any other issues, that might arise. But, what I would say, and I've said this to, again, to many people that I've met with on this issue, that building a new school in Massachusetts is a very rigorous and lengthy and well-prescribed process. It's a process that is laid out by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or the MSBA. And in order to get state funding to supplement local funding, communities have to go through that process, like it or not. Generally, what I hear from people is complaints about how onerous and burdensome that process is, because it really requires communities to jump through a lot of hoops to make sure that the project is really carefully thought out. It's as cost effective as possible. It's evaluated all the alternatives that were available, that it meets all the academic needs of the students. And the Northeast has gone through that process, and it's been almost 10 years. So they did go through that process. It's overseen by the MSBA. It's a public process, so every decision along the way is public. I do think that Northeast, their school building committee, could have done a better job of engaging the public and communicating more about what they were thinking, and, for example, what options they were considering for where to locate the new school. But it was a public process, and they did evaluate a variety of sites and determined that this was those sites, this was the best site for the new school. So at this point in time, that's been approved by the MSBA. The MSBA has approved the funding that they're going to provide, that the state will provide. The Northeast, as some of you know, did conduct a vote in order to secure the local share of funding. And anything we do to try to change that at this point, including trying to find a new, put the high school on a new site, would mean that we would jeopardize the project moving forward. And in fact, they'd have to go back in the queue, with the MSBA, and that would be a huge disappointment, because they would then have to compete, with projects from all over the state for funding. It's a very, very competitive process. There's, unfortunately, not enough money to meet all the needs across Massachusetts. And so that could mean students and families would wait many, many more years for a new regional vocational high school. So I don't think that's a good option. So I do think, we need to, we do need to move forward, but I think, we should certainly be having the conversation about anything that can be done to minimize the environmental impact, of this new building, making sure it's as accessible to students as possible, and and anything else we can do to make sure it's the best possible project it can be. All right. We have a question about, some of the new apartment buildings being made available to low-income and senior citizens. Hi, Charlene. Thanks for that. Yeah, so this sort of gets back at some of the conversation, we were having earlier about how challenging it is around housing access in our area, both the high rents, that we're facing, unfortunately, and the cost of, home ownership also. There's no doubt that we need more housing for all different income levels and people at different stages of life, whether they're single, young couples, young children, or seniors, people with disabilities. We need more of all of that. And we certainly need more public housing. Each of our communities does have some stock of public housing, but we haven't really built any new public housing in a long time, and we've just been struggling even to maintain what we already have. Fortunately, again, thanks to some of the pandemic relief money that Massachusetts received, we have been able to put a lot more money than was true in the past into various housing programs. So we are building more housing, including more low-income housing. We've been able to put a lot more money into public housing. For example, the Malden Housing Authority is doing a major renovation of one of their properties right now, which is great. But again, a lot more needs to be done. So I do think you're going to see the legislature continue to consider further zoning reforms potentially to encourage and support multifamily housing. Accessory dwelling units could be another area. I think that would provide more options for seniors and people with disabilities. Some of our communities have done that already. And again, just more support for public housing and other affordable housing projects, as well as more funding for our voucher program, which is, the federal government has the Section 8 program. The state level, we have the MRVP program. That program needs to continue to be expanded as well, to help people, again, afford the cost of housing. All right. All right, great. We've got another question here around gun safety, gun laws, and how we can support making progress on that. Yes, that, as you probably saw, was one of the top priority issues in the survey. You probably are all, thanks Fritzy again for raising this. And folks are probably aware that Massachusetts, does have some of the strongest, gun safety, gun violence prevention laws in the country. We don't allow certain kinds of firearms. We limit the size of magazines. We have very strict background check policies. We have very strict gun storage laws, for example. We have red flag law we passed, but there's always more we need to do. A good example would be ghost guns, which are not traceable. We do need to pass legislation around those. That's something that has come up in recent years. I'm also working with Moms Demand Action on a new bill that we filed together this session, which basically would require the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, to provide information to school districts so that at the beginning of a new school year, when principals and superintendents and others are sending information home to parents and guardians, they would include in that information about safe storage of firearms. Basically, what's the Massachusetts law around this, and what are some of the ways that to make sure that any firearms are securely stored in a home. A few other states have done this. It has been shown to reduce unintentional access to guns, particularly by children. So I'm already starting that conversation with my colleagues and with the folks over at DESE. So that's another example. But there's a variety of things I think we could do and need to do. Those are just giving a few examples, as we start this new session. All right. Let's see. Can my communities count on you and other senators to continue the long-overdue justice work related to our genocide? Thank you so much, Taylor, for sharing your, very little bit. I wish we could hear more about your personal story and your family's journey, but thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, I can assure you, issues of, again, related to our Indigenous communities, related to our BIPOC community, racial justice work is absolutely a priority in the legislature, and I know is a priority for our new governor and her administration. And that discussion cuts across all issues. It certainly continued around criminal justice and further police reforms that we need to be just talking about, but also in our work around healthcare and addressing racial and ethnic health disparities, our work in our schools, building on the Student Opportunity Act and continuing to provide make sure a high quality education is accessible to all students, regardless of their, what zip code they live in. Our work around environmental justice, I've been really pleased to see how much more focus we have on environmental justice, in recent years, and just generally continuing to advance civil rights and human rights in our Commonwealth. That will always has been and will continue to be very, very high priority for me, and I think I can say for many of my colleagues as well. All right, so I think that was the last question. Hopefully we got to everybody. We are right at about 7:30, and I think we were going to be stopping about now. So thank you again very much, everyone, for joining us for the town hall. Thank you for participating in our survey. This is not by any means the end of your being involved in the political process. Really want to encourage you to continue to interact with us. You can always call my office. You can email me. We try to respond to emails in a timely manner as much as we can. Occasionally we get really busy. It takes a bit longer. But we try to make sure we're as responsive as we can be. You can also always attend office hours, again, in person or virtual. Or if none of this works for you, just reach out to us and we will figure out how to connect with you. Thank you so much for being involved and engaged, and for being so passionate about these critical issues facing our communities. And I really look forward to the work ahead, both at the state level in the legislature and working with our wonderful new governor, but also the work that we're all doing at the local level, in each of our communities. So thank you, and have a good night.